Hello everybody, this is Jack at the ParanormalIntelligenceAgency.com. Thanks for joining me again for yet another deep, dark paranormal mystery. As always, I bring you the best available evidence for any given paranormal mystery. And today we are going to explore the deep, dark mystery of the Sirius event, or the Sirius mystery. Strangely enough, this leads us into even the construction of the pyramids. Now, please join us on the website. The URL is in the description below, and you can enjoy some of the exclusive, in-depth paranormal reports that only we publish. So back to our mystery. As far as most credible researchers are able to ascertain, the Sirius event, or the Sirius mystery, occurred thousands of years ago in the geographic area of ancient Sumeria. The earliest records of the world's first civilization speak of an interaction with something that can only be described as a non-human intelligence. The renowned scientist Robert Temple, in his seminal work, The Sirius Mystery, has amassed so much evidence in regards to this event and has done so with such acumen and scientific integrity that it raised the blood pressure of the ruling establishment and resulted in a documented 15-year campaign of harassment and intimidation against him by various intelligence agencies. The evidence for this event, which was so eloquently put forth by Temple, argues with a mountain of evidence that beings from a neighboring star system, the Sirius star system, came to this planet and interacted with the primitive hunter-gatherer tribes of ancient Sumeria. This mystery began to unravel, strangely enough, with the discovery of a Stone Age tribe in Western Africa by French anthropologists in 1935. The tribe called themselves the Dogon people. Their lineage was eventually traced back to Egypt and Sumer. After years of study and gaining the respect and admiration of tribal elders, these anthropologists were finally told the inner secrets of the priest of the Dogon. The anthropologists quickly determined that these Stone Age people possessed deeply detailed information regarding the Sirius star system. This was knowledge which no Stone Age people should possibly possess. The astonishing thing was that the Dogon possessed detailed information on stellar bodies whose existence remained completely unknown to modern-day astronomers, and this was until decades after the discovery of the tribe. When asked how it was that they had come by this knowledge, the Dogon priests said the same thing that the ancient Sumerians said in their stone tablets. They said that a race of gods had come from the sky and taught them sacred knowledge, which now made up the secret body of knowledge, which their priests were charged with guarding and keeping safe. The anthropologist Grial and Dieterlen make clear that the large bright star of Sirius is not as important to the Dogon as the tiny Sirius B, which is invisible to the naked eye, and to whom the Dogon equate to a common and extremely tiny cereal grain in the area, which they call Digitaria exilis, is the name of the seed. Robert Temple states, the Dogon consider the most important star in the sky to be Sirius B, which cannot be seen. They admit that it is invisible. How then do they know it exists? In the report by Grial and Dieterlen, they write, Sirius, however, is not the basis of the system. It is the foci of the tiny star called Digitaria or Potolo, which hogs the attention of the male initiate. Later in their report, they state, "The problem of knowing how, with no instruments at their disposal, men could know the movements and certain characteristics of virtually invisible stars has not been settled nor even posed." Temple says simply, "The Dogon believed that their ancient ancestors were visited by beings from the Sirius star system who imparted this knowledge to them, and who are claimed by the Dogon to somehow be amphibious in nature." The knowledge held by the Dogon and similar tribes of the region goes much deeper than just the knowledge of the invisible star Sirius B. The Dogon also described the orbit of Sirius B around Sirius A as egg-shaped or elliptical. And Temple elaborates on this. He says the orbit of Potolo or Sirius B, which the Dogon have described as egg-shaped or elliptical, is specifically described as having the main star, Sirius, as one of the foci of its orbit. What the Dogon were saying, and which they also make quite clear graphically in their drawings, is that the orbit of Sirius B around Sirius A is a kind which obeys Kepler's laws of planetary motion, extending to other orbiting bodies. The question then becomes, how did these people, with no access to the theories of Kepler or his successors, know about matters like elliptical orbits? Because there were no Western missionaries to the Dogon prior to Grial and Dieterlen first visiting them in 1931. Temple asks, how did they even get the idea in the first place that elliptical orbits existed rather than circular, much less apply this idea to some invisible star way out in space? And also, to get it right, that Sirius A was at one of the foci rather than just, somewhere in the ellipse and not at the center. Wouldn't the natural primitive idea seem to be, if you wanted to say the orbit was elliptical, still to have Sirius itself at the center? It is the only visible star in the Sirius system, and yet they know too much to make a mistake like that. For the whole point about Kepler's law is that not only are orbits ellipses, but that the sun must always be one of the foci, otherwise nothing will work. The Dogon state that the orbital period of Sirius is 50 years and is represented by their sacred Sigwai ceremony. The Dogon also state that according to Temple, the Sirius B rotates on its axis, demonstrating that they know a star can do such a thing. In reality, all stars do rotate on their axis. The tribe were further recorded as saying, as well as its movements in space, Digitaria or Potolo, what they call Sirius B, revolves upon itself over the period of 1 year, and this revolution is honored during the celebration of the Bado rite. Temple goes on to state, the Dogon believe the day of the Bado is when a beam of rays carrying important signals strikes the Earth from Sirius B. Modern-day astronomers do not know what the true orbit is of Sirius B. The star is so small, we think we are doing well just to see it. The Dogon describes Sirius B as the infinitely tiny, and modern astronomy has proven Sirius B to be a white dwarf, the tiniest visible form of star in the entire universe. The tribe goes on in some of their writings to say Potolo is the smallest thing there is. It is the heaviest star. That's shocking, because this would indicate knowledge about the extreme density of white dwarf stars. The most perplexing of all statements made by the Dogon deals with their belief about a third star in the Sirius system, They call this star Emma, and comparing it to Sirius B, they say it is 4 times as light. The amazing part about these statements is that Sirius C was not known or believed by modern astronomers to even exist until 1995. That's almost a 20-year period, guys, from the publication of the book, The Sirius Mystery. And this fact has led many critics of the time that declared Temple's conclusions as being false are now all falling silent and don't have anything to say for themselves. It was soon realized that to get to the heart of the mystery of the Dogon tribe, he would have to delve ever deeper into the ancient origins of the Dogon themselves. This path soon led back to ancient Egypt and Sumeria and to the very beginnings of civilization as we know it. He soon found that the ancient Egyptians too possessed vast information about the Sirius star system. Sothis was the name the Egyptians used for Sirius, and they based their entire calendar on it. Sothis was the ancient Egyptian name for Sirius. It was spelled as it was spelled by the Greeks, and it was by the movements of Sirius that they regulated their calendar. The first appearance of Sirius on the western horizon just before the sun, after 70 days in the Duat, or the underworld where it's not visible, is called the Heliacal rising, or with the sun rising of Sirius. The event occurred once a year, and it gave rise to the Sothic calendar. The heliacal rising of Sirius was so important to the ancient Egyptians that gigantic temples were constructed with their main aisles oriented precisely towards the spot on the horizon where Sirius would appear on the expected morning. The light of Sirius would be channeled along this corridor, and because of the precise orientation, it would literally flood the altar of the inner sanctum like a pinpointed spotlight that had been switched on. This blast of light focused from a single star was possible because the temple would be otherwise total darkness within. In this way, the presence of the star was made manifest in the temple. The most interesting discovery has to do with the pyramid complex at Giza. Now, Temple pioneered a new way of looking at the structures at Giza, whereby stellar constellations patterns were seen as represented on the ground. Robert Bauval, another independent researcher on the complex of Giza, has paid generous tribute to Temple's work on numerous occasions. Bauval agrees that the complex at Giza is indeed a representation of a stellar constellation on the ground, and in 1994 published a book called The Orion Mystery, in which he points out that the layout of the 3 main pyramids at Giza corresponds with the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Orion and Argo, which we see to have these symbolic presences on Egyptian soil, are the 2 constellations most associated with Sirius. And Bauval goes on to explain how the southern shaft of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid in ancient times pointed to the constellation of Orion, and that the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber pointed directly to Sirius. Temple believes that the Great Pyramid is probably a representation of the star Sirius B, and that the Pyramid of Khephren is a representation of our Sun. Measurements performed by a Dr. I.E.S. Edwards, a man considered to be one of the utmost authorities of the physical dimensions of the pyramids, recorded the mean of the sides of the largest of the base of the Great Pyramid with the side of the base of the Pyramid of Khephren. He found that the larger measurement is 1.06 that of the smaller. The most current astrophysical data states that the mass of Sirius B is 1.053 that of our Sun. Temple concluded that the correspondence is accurate to 0.014. However, this tiny discrepancy is highly significant. because the fraction 0.0136, which rounded off is 0.014, is the precise discrepancy between the mathematics of the octave and the mathematics of the fifth in harmonic theory. And that's where things really start to get interesting. 0.0136 is referred to as the comma of Pythagoras, and it was known to the ancient Greeks, who are said to have obtained knowledge of it from Egypt. Now, there's been extensive work done with the comma of Pythagoras, and it is sometimes called the particle of Pythagoras. It is believed the numerical coefficient of this particle, 136, is related to the 136 degrees of freedom of the electron, as discussed by the famous physicist, the late Sir Arthur Eddington. The number +1 gives the fine structure constant of nuclear physics, which is 137. Essentially, it expresses the minute discrepancy between the ideal and the real. And for the pyramid builders to incorporate it as the identical discrepancy in the building of the pyramids should be interpreted as their way of signaling to us that this is a symbolic representation of a very real cosmic fact. As if to tease us, the builders of the pyramids appear to have left a microscopic discrepancy in the correlation precisely equal to a universal numerical constant. Now, musical theorists are well aware of the discrepancy, 0.0136. It necessitates the tuning technique known as equal tempering. And the ratio, 1.053, is actually the precise value of the sacred fraction of ancient times, which was 256 over 243, mentioned by Microbius at the turn of the 5th, 4th, and 5th centuries, roughly, who describes its use in harmonic theory by people to him he described as the ancients. This brings us to a most interesting question. Why is it that our sun and the star Sirius B have a mass ratio of 1.053 in any event, for the fraction 256 over 243, of which 1.053 is the decimal expression, does appear to have a universal harmonic status. So, by stumbling upon this coincidence, we may have uncovered some unknown and unsuspected astrophysical harmonical value in operation between two neighboring stars. It makes more sense to view the correlation as one which appeals to underlying fundamentals of cosmic structures than to view it as a special case applying only to Sirius B and our star. The ultimate point that Temple makes with his research is that our universe has more structure than we think. And that structure can be so precisely articulated that it can generate an exact value of this kind as a ratio between neighboring stellar bodies. The whole thing is really put best in a question and answer form. How is it that two stars, 8.7 light years apart, can have a mass ratio which is not random, but expresses a universal harmonic value which is precise to 3 decimal points? Temple believed it's because the astrophysics of the stars and their evolutionary development, such as a white dwarf, follow certain harmonic laws which our scientists have never suspected. we should not overlook the fact that the universal harmonic fraction concerned is not one which today receives any attention. And this indicates that it is ancient harmonic theory that should be dusted off and studied for clues as to what is going on. Now, I'm going to summarize all of these findings into a very easy to understand nutshell. Imagine that you walk into a room and there is an individual playing a violin on one end. On the other end of the room is a piano, and no one is seated. No one is playing it. As the individual playing the violin hits each individual note of the song they are playing, you can walk over to the piano and you can look down at the strings and you will see them vibrate to the same notes being played. This is called harmonics. The idea that one body can cause change in another through the same mathematical principle that was encoded in the building of the pyramids. And what's even weirder is that all of this knowledge was contained by a Western African tribe who traced their lineage back to Egypt. Now, every year on the day of July 23rd, the Dogon tribe believe that this is exactly what happens between our star and the star Sirius. And our star and the star Sirius share the same exact harmonic value relationship as the violin playing the notes that are then shown in the strings of the piano. And what that means is that Sirius and our star have the same relationship. And so whatever affects the star Sirius through this harmonic relationship affects our star, and then it affects biological life on this planet. This is what the Dogon call the Day of the Bado. Now, the same principle is being rediscovered by our scientists today in the form of acoustic levitation. And in the oldest accounts of how the pyramids were built, largely dismissed by the academic community, are legends about magicians who were able to float the stones into place. And now we have a base of that very knowledge built into the dimensions of the pyramids themselves. They described these gods as being amphibious in nature. It is the only time when a people described their gods as being so ugly to look at that they could barely look at them at all. They stated these creatures returned to the ocean at night and taught the knowledge during the day. Now, the Dogon believe that these creatures will return one day, and they call that day the Day of the Fish. And I believe that it was that prediction which caused all the many intelligence agencies to harass and intimidate Robert Temple as and after he published the Sirius Mystery. And that's it for today, guys. Join me again next time. I'll be bringing you the best available evidence for yet another deep, dark paranormal mystery. Join me over at the website. The URL is below, as well as a link to my live weekly show. I'll see you then, guys.